Montana Territory, early spring, 1883. The wind blew hard across the high plains, snapping at the canvas roof of the wagon that had broken its wheel half a mile back. Abigail Mae Morton sat on a rock near the edge of a dry creek bed, arms wrapped tight around two small children. They were too tired to cry anymore. Dust clung to her skirts, her lips were cracked, and her boots were worn near through. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. The boy, Levy, barely 6, leaned against her shoulder. His little sister, Lucy, only 4, was asleep in Abigail's lap, her cheeks flushed from windburn. They were not her children, not by blood, but they had no one else now, and she could not leave them. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the prairie. Abigail blinked slow, her eyes stinging. She had thought she could make it to Miles City, thought she could start over. But the man who had promised her marriage and a home had taken their money and left them stranded outside of Forsyth. Her foolishness had nearly cost the children their lives. A rider crested the ridge. She saw him before she heard his horse tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, the low sun catching on the silver concho at his hat band. He pulled up short when he saw them, boots hitting the ground in one smooth motion. "You all right?" His voice was deep, steady. Abigail stood, slow and wary. "Our wagon's back yonder, wheels snapped, we were walking to town." He looked at the children. "How long you been out here?" "Since morning." He came closer, eyes sweeping over the little girl in Abigail's arms. "She fevered?" "No," Abigail said quickly. "Just tired." He nodded once. "My horse can carry all 3 of you. There's an outpost a few miles west, water and shelter. I'll get the wagon tomorrow." He crouched to Levy's level. "What's your name, son?" "Levy," the boy said, voice small. The man smiled gently. "I'm Orin Prescott. You stick close to me, I'll make sure you and your sister are safe." Abigail hesitated, heart pounding. She didn't know this man, but the children were wilting and night would fall soon. "I can walk," she said. "You take the children." "It's a hard ride," he said. "But all right." He lifted Lucy first, cradling her like porcelain, then helped Levy up behind the saddle horn. When Abigail reached for the stirrup, he caught her elbow. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm fine." He didn't argue, just steadied her as she climbed up behind the children. Then he swung into the saddle behind her, his chest warm against her back, one arm wrapping around to hold the reins. The ride was rough, the trail narrow and wind-blown. But the warmth of his coat around her shoulders and the way his voice calmed Levy when the boy started to cry made something loosen in her chest. They reached a lined shack tucked into the pines just as the sun slipped behind the mountains. He helped them down, carried Lucy inside, and lit the lamp. "I'll make coffee," he said, already moving. "You sit." Abigail sank onto the cot, Levy curling beside her. She watched Orin work steady hands, quiet movements, a man who did not waste words. He set a tin cup in her hands, then knelt in front of her. "You hurt anywhere?" "No, you eat today," she shook her head. He stood, rummaged through a crate, and handed her a crust of bread and a tin of beans. "Not much, but it'll hold you till morning." Abigail took it, fingers brushing his. "Thank you," he nodded, then crouched again to check Lucy's pulse. "She'll be all right, you did good keeping them safe." "I was not supposed to be the one keeping them," Abigail said softly. "They are not mine." "Whose are they?" "Friend of mine, died on the trail. We came west together." "I thought," her voice broke, she swallowed hard. "I thought I had someone waiting in Miles City." Orin's face did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. "Man left you. Took everything, left us 2 days ago." He stepped back, jaw tight. "You got family?" "No," he nodded once like he was filing that away. "Then you stay here tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you to the ranch. My brother and I run cattle, got space. You can rest there, kids too." "I do not want charity," he looked her in the eye. "It is not charity. It is kindness." She looked away. "I am not what you wanted to find out on the trail, a woman with 2 children that are not even hers." He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, quiet and sure, "You are more than I hoped for." Her head snapped up. "You do not even know me." "I watched you carry 2 kids across open prairie," he said. "You kept them safe. You did not quit when things turned bad. I know enough." Her eyes stung again, but this time from something warmer than wind. She looked at Levy, already asleep, then Lucy, soft breath steady in the silence. Abigail took a shaky breath. "What is it you want, Mr. Prescott?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Peace. A home, someone strong enough to stand beside me." She stared at him. The silence stretched, but it felt solid, not empty. "You should sleep," he said, voice rougher now. "I will keep watch." She nodded, but did not lie down right away. Instead, she watched him as he stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. For the first time in days, she felt something settle in her chest, safety. Tomorrow would come. And maybe, just maybe, she would not have to face it alone. A pale wash of dawn spilled through the chinked logs of the lined shack, quiet and soft. Abigail stirred beneath the quilt Orin had laid over her sometime in the night. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, but her body had given out before her mind could argue. Lucy was curled beside her, one hand flung across Abigail's bodice, and Levy lay tucked against the wall, still as a stone. The scent of coffee drifted in strong, bitter, real. She sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes, and found Orin at the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, stirring something in a dented pot. He didn't glance back. "There's bread left," he said, voice low to keep from waking the children. "And I found some salt pork in the stores." Abigail rose, folding the quilt and tucking it over Lucy. Her legs ached from the ride, but the stiffness didn't bother her. It reminded her she was alive, still here. "You been up long?" she asked. "Couple hours." Sky turned clear. "Should hold." She moved to the table, hands smoothing her skirt out of habit. "Do you always ride out alone?" He handed her a tin plate. "Most times. My brother runs the southern pasture. I take the north line." She accepted the food, the warmth of it pushing against the hollow under her ribs. "No wife waiting on you?" "No." He poured her coffee, then filled a second plate and crouched near the cot, nudging Levy with a gentle hand. "Breakfast, son." Levy blinked awake, confused at first, then sat up fast, eyes darting to his sister. Abigail watched the way Orin stayed crouched, not crowding, not commanding, just present. "You always help strangers?" she asked, keeping her voice measured. He stood and met her eyes. "Not always. Just the ones I reckon I'd regret leaving behind." Later, after the children had eaten and Lucy had been coaxed into a little coat Orin found in a crate, they set out. The wagon was where they'd left it, axle cracked clean through. Orin tied it off to the back of his roan and packed what he could onto his own saddle. Abigail walked this time, one hand on Lucy's back, while Levy trudged beside Orin, asking questions about the hills and whether bears lived in them. The trail snaked down a slope and opened wide into cottonwood bottomland. Nestled there, half hidden by the trees, was a low-slung ranch house of weathered pine, smoke curling from the chimney. A corral stood nearby, a handful of cattle pressing against the fence, and a man with a thick beard leaned on the gate, watching their approach. "That's my brother Ellis," Orin said. "He don't talk much, but he's kind." As they drew closer, Ellis tipped his hat. His eyes flicked to Abigail, then to the children, but he said nothing. Orin dismounted and lifted Lucy down first, then turned to Abigail. "You'll stay in the west room," he said. "It's quiet and warm. I'll bring in the rest of your things." She hesitated. "There's no need to give up your space." "I'm not," he said. "I sleep in the bunkhouse like always." Inside, the house smelled of pine, soap, and earth. The west room had a braided rug and a narrow bed. Abigail helped the children up, then turned to find Orin in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. "Found this in the wagon." "Yours?" She took it from him, fingers tightening around the lid. "Yes, thank you." He nodded and stepped back. That night, after the children had gone quiet, Abigail sat on the porch stoop, shawl pulled tight. The stars were thick overhead, the kind you only saw when the land stretched empty for miles in every direction. Orin sat on the top step, elbows on his knees. She spoke without looking at him. "You said you wanted peace." "I did. You lost someone." Her voice was softer than she expected. He didn't answer right away. Then my wife died 5 years back. Fever took her fast, took the babe with her." Abigail's throat tightened. She said nothing, only shifted slightly so that their shoulders almost touched. "I tried leaving," he said. "Rode south for a while, thought distance might dull it, but I came back." "Why?" He turned his head just enough that she could feel his gaze. "Because this is home. And because I kept thinking maybe the Lord wasn't done with me yet." She looked at her hands, thumbs pressed tight together. "I thought I could build something too. Back in Ohio, I taught school, thought I could find a place and make a life. But I've done nothing but run." "You're not running now." The breeze stirred the cottonwoods, a low rush like water over stone. "I don't know what's next," she said. "You don't have to, not tonight." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I never meant to end up here. I'm glad you did." She turned to face him fully, and in the dark his expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "You said you weren't what I wanted," he said, "but I've never looked for what's easy. Only what's real." She felt the weight of that settle between them. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to close the distance, just waited, and for the first time in a long while, Abigail didn't feel like she had to protect herself from hope. Her voice barely carried. "I'm tired of pretending I don't want to belong somewhere." Orin's hand brushed the porch slat beside hers, not touching but near enough that the space felt full. "Then stay," he said. "Let's see what can grow here." She didn't answer in words, but she didn't pull away either. The ranch settled into a rhythm, and Abigail found herself threading into it without meaning to. She rose early, helped Ellis's wife, Marin, in the kitchen, and took washing down to the creek when the sun was full. Lucy played with a rag doll Marin had sewn from scraps, and Levy followed Ellis like a pup, watching fence repair and learning the difference between mule deer tracks and elk. Orin kept to his work. He was up before the chickens, out riding fence lines or hauling hay, and back only when the light turned gold. He didn't hover. But every evening he found her. One afternoon, as Abigail pinned pillowcases to the line, she felt a shift in the air behind her. She didn't turn. "How far's the creek past that ridge?" she asked, tying off the last sheet. "Half a mile, give or take." "Why?" "Lucy needs a proper washing. She's been digging again. I can take her." She turned then. "I'd rather go. If I leave Levy with Marin, would you walk with us?" He nodded. "I'll saddle the bay. She's steady. Lucy can ride." They set out just before supper, Lucy perched in front of Abigail, her small hands tight on the horn while Orin led the mare by the reins. The trail curved through aspen and willow, and the hush of spring saturated the air birds high in the cottonwoods, a breeze that smelled faintly of wet earth. At the creek, Orin lifted Lucy from the saddle and stepped back as Abigail knelt to wet a cloth. The child squirmed but didn't protest much as Abigail scrubbed her neck and behind her ears. "She's taken to you," he said. Abigail wrung out the cloth. "She doesn't have much choice." "That's not why." Lucy wandered off to pick up stones, and Abigail sat back on her heels. "I keep thinking I'll wake and find all of this gone. Dreamed it, maybe?" "You didn't. I haven't earned any of it." He crouched beside her but didn't speak right away. "I know what it's like to feel unsteady. After my wife passed, I lived like a ghost. Ate when it got bad enough, worked because muscle memory told me to. I thought that was all I had left." She looked at him, the sun catching in his hair, a faint line of dust along his jaw. "What changed?" He picked up a pebble, turned it in his fingers, then tossed it toward the water. "Time passed. Then I saw you on the plains carrying 2 kids like you'd carry your own, and I remembered what it felt like to care again. The quiet between them was full, not empty. I've never had anyone say that to me," she whispered. "I don't say things I don't mean." Lucy ran back with a rock shaped like a heart and pressed it into Abigail's palm. Abigail smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "She doesn't remember her mother's voice," Abigail said. "Sometimes she asks if mine was the same. What do you say?" I tell her no, but I tell her mine will be here as long as she needs it. They stayed by the creek until the sky began to blush. Back at the ranch, Marin had left stew warming on the stove. Abigail took Lucy in to change her dress while Orin lingered with Ellis at the corral. Later, with the children asleep, Abigail stepped out onto the porch. Orin was already there, arms folded, watching the sky. She sat beside him without a word. "I've been thinking," he said after a while. "You and the children could stay in the winter house. It's smaller, but it's yours. No one's used it since my uncle passed." She turned to him, startled. "You'd give me a house?" "I'm not giving it, I'm offering it. You make your own way." "I'm just making room for it." Abigail looked out across the dark pasture. Somewhere, a cow lowed. "What happens after that?" He didn't move. "I'd like to court you, Abigail, if you'll let me." She stared ahead, heart thudding, hands clasped in her lap. "I'm not a woman men court," she said at last. "You are to me." Still, she said nothing. "I won't ask again if you don't want it," he added. "But I'd be lying if I said I didn't already see you here, not just as a guest, as part of it." She didn't speak for a long time. Then she stood, steady and sure, and looked down at him. "I'll move into that house," she said, "but only if you start coming by in the evenings." His eyes met hers, and this time he smiled, not wide, just enough. "I will." She went inside without another word, but her heart felt full in a way it never had, even in her best dreams. The night closed in around the house, soft and steady, and something inside her, long buried, began to bloom. By late May, the cottonwoods had leafed out in full, their green flickering like coins in the wind. The winter house stood at the edge of the pasture, its shutters freshly mended and chimney cleaned. Abigail swept the last curls of sawdust from the floor, straightened the lace curtain Marin had given her, then stepped out into the sun, apron in hand. Orin was there, reins looped around his forearm, 2 bridles slung over his shoulder. "You ever ride anything not headed to town?" he asked. She shaded her eyes. "Not since I was 12. That horse turned and took off through a berry thicket." He lifted the reins, one brow raised just enough to be read as invitation. "Ours don't bolt. You'll come?" "Where?" "North Ridge. Salt blocks gone from the high trough." "I was headed that way." Abigail glanced back at the house. "Marin's with the children," she said. "They're making biscuits, or trying to. I suppose Lucy'll be covered in flour." "That's a certainty." She tied her apron over the porch rail and followed him to the barn. The mare he handed her was dappled and calm-eyed, with a fleece blanket laid gentle beneath the saddle. Orin adjusted the stirrups wordlessly, then stepped back. "Ready," she nodded, jaw set. "Just don't let me end up in another thicket." They rode uphill, the trail narrowing as it rose between granite outcrops and stretches of bitterbrush. Abigail kept her hands steady, back straight, breath slow. Orin didn't speak unless to point out a kestrel nest, or the place where a cougar had dragged off a yearling last winter. At the ridge, he dismounted and pulled a block of salt from his pack, laying it near the trough where deer prints lined the mud. Abigail stayed mounted, watching the wind ripple the grass. "I never asked," she said. "What made you stay on this land, after everything?" He rested one hand on the saddle horn, glancing out toward the break of hills. "My father came up from Missouri in '64. Said the war took too much from him. He built this place from logs he cut himself. When he died, Ellis and I were still boys. We kept it because we didn't know how not to." She looked down at her reins. "And now I keep it because I want to." They rode back slow, the sun slanting behind their shoulders. At the barn, he helped her down, his hands careful at her waist. She didn't step away right away. "I like riding," she said, his eyes met hers. "You looked steady up there." That evening, she found Levy on the porch, carving something into a strip of pine. When she asked what it was, he said it was a button hook. Abigail praised his work, brushing the curls off his forehead, then went inside to find Lucy asleep on Marin's lap, flour on her cheek. Later, as dusk thickened, Abigail walked down toward the barn. Orin stood by the gate, checking the latch on the far pen. She waited until he turned. "I've been thinking," she said. "You asked if I'd let you court me. I did. I'm not sure what that looks like." He moved closer, slow. "It looks like this. I bring you a parcel of tea from town. You tell me about the school you ran. I help Levy with his carving when he gets stuck." You tell me what you don't want and I listen. She folded her arms, but her voice was softer than before. And if I expect too much, I hope you do. She watched him, the slope of his shoulders, the dust at his cuffs. Then she said, you can come by tomorrow evening. After supper. I'll bring tea. She nodded and turned but paused halfway to the house. I want you to understand something, she said without turning back. I'm not used to being someone people stay for. The wind stirred the grass between them. You are now, he said. She walked on, heart steady, the last light falling behind her like a curtain drawing closed on everything she'd once feared was all she'd ever have. By early June, the hills turned soft with wind-blown grass, and the wild roses bloomed pale against the fence posts. Abigail kept her days full tending the garden behind the winter house, mending shirts for Ellis and Orin, teaching Lucy her letters with charcoal on pine shingles. Levy spent most mornings in the barn loft, whittling or helping Ellis with bridling. The children had found their rhythm, and so had she. Each evening, Orin came. He never arrived the same way twice, sometimes with a jar of honey wrapped in cloth, sometimes with a tale from the upper pasture. Once he brought a book of Psalms with half the pages loose and said he'd thought it might suit her shelf. He never lingered past dusk, never touched her hand unless helping her down from the porch rail. But each night he left, something inside Abigail curled tighter around the hope he never brought up but always carried. One warm afternoon she found him in the tack shed, sleeves rolled, oiling his saddle straps. You busy? She asked. He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a cloth. Not so busy I'd turn you away. I've written to the land office in Miles City. Asked what it would take to file a homestead claim. He stood, brows raised. You planning to leave? I was thinking, she said, running her hand over a bridle hook. If I had a deed to this plot, I'd feel less like I was borrowing someone else's life. Orin leaned against the post. You're not borrowing anything, but if it's your own name on the papers you want, I'll help you see it done. I don't want to be beholden, I know. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. But I also know you don't have to hold everything alone. Abigail studied his face, the way the sun lit the edges of his beard, the pinch of dust in the creases beside his eyes. You've never asked what I want. I was waiting until you knew. She hesitated, then said, I want a piece of land that's mine. I want the children to stay here to grow up with roots. I want to wake up knowing I've built something that lasts. He nodded, slow. And me, she inhaled, steady. You're the only part I didn't plan for and the part I don't want to do without. That night they sat on the porch, knees brushing. Abigail leaned her shoulder gently into his. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand, fingers calloused and warm against hers. Will you marry me? He asked. She turned to him. Yes, she said, without pause, without fear. They married under the cottonwoods beside the creek, where Lucy had once handed her a heart-shaped stone. Marin stitched a dress from muslin and lace, and Ellis carved 2 rings from silver coin. Levy stood proud and straight, holding the book of Psalms open to the wedding blessing. The wind stirred the trees, and the hush of the land seemed to hold its breath as they spoke their vows. Afterward, they ate biscuits and honey and stew from tin bowls while the children chased each other through the grass. Orin pressed a kiss to Abigail's forehead as the sun dipped low, and she leaned into him like she'd always belonged there. That night, they closed the door of the winter house for the first time as husband and wife. The children slept in the front room, curled together beneath a new quilt Marin had pieced from old shirts. Abigail stood by the small window, watching the moonlight spill over the pasture. Orin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You ever think you'd have this? He murmured. No, she whispered, resting her head against his chest, but I think I always wanted it. He kissed the curve of her neck, slow and reverent. Then we'll keep it. Every bit. Their life unfolded in quiet ways. A new fence built together, Lucy's first spelling bee at the schoolhouse down the road, Levy learning to ride Orin's old gelding without falling. Abigail planted rhubarb by the porch and taught Marin how to dry herbs for winter. Orin built a swing from rope and pine, and on warm evenings they sat outside with their fingers laced, the children's laughter drifting through the dusk. They did not speak often of the past. It lived behind them like a shadow at their back, but when it rose, they met it together. And in time it faded, years passed. Lucy grew tall and freckled, with a sharp wit and a fondness for wildflowers. Levy took over morning chores before dawn and carved wooden toys for the neighbors' babies. Abigail kept her garden neat and her shelves full of letters from friends she'd made across the territory, widows, teachers, other women who'd found a way to begin again. And Orin remained her steady anchor, quiet, firm, hers. Each evening he still brought something to the door, a new story, a sprig of sage, a kiss pressed soft to her wrist. They built a life not out of grand promises or loud declarations, but through each day's choice to stay, to tend, to love. And in that, they found everything they needed.